on to Textiles and Tea with the Handweavers Guild of America. I'm Kathy Group. I'm the Advertising and Marketing Manager for HGA, and I'm your host today. Today's Textiles and Tea is sponsored by the generosity of Grace Tully. Thank you, Grace, for donating and supporting HGA in this program. We thank you, and we really appreciate it. We will take questions, as always, at the end of the program today, like the last 15 minutes. If you would, always put it in the Q&A and not in the chat. We love your comments, those are great. So if you want to put a comment in the chat, that's wonderful. But if it's a question, please put it in the Q&A. Today, we have William Storms with us. William is a mathematically driven craftsman. I love that phrase, a mathematically driven craftsman who moonlights as a hand weaver and daylights as a full-time Jacquard designer for Crypton Fabrics in a mill in North Carolina. His handwoven work is an ongoing effort to produce three-dimensionality in a traditionally two-dimension world. Combining collapsed weave structures with pliable, soft metals and Passementrie techniques, Storm is still on that mission to discover his formula. Welcome. It's wonderful to have you here, William.
Figured I should unmute. Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Okay, there we go. Our first question. What's your favorite tea?
So I actually racked my brain on this because I wanted it to be like a meaningful first answer. And then I realized I drink kombucha like every day. So I guess that fits with my sort of Brooklyn hipster mantra. So kombucha is what I'm gonna go
What
with.
kind? What flavor?
Right now, it's tantric turmeric. I haven't really jumped on board and started making my own. Probably should have done that mid-pandemic when everyone was making sourdough, but here we are, so I buy it.
Well, at least you're doing the healthy turmeric thing. That's great. Well, for everybody wants to know, how did you get started in fibers?
So I actually went to FIT in New York City. I had always been in painting and drawing, especially growing up. And I went to the Fashion Institute of Technology in Chelsea, and I was in their fine art program. And you know, my parents were super supportive. They were like, we were confident you'll figure out what you need to do. And so I kind of was looking at what other majors and opportunities FIT had, and that they had like jewelry making, accessory design, fashion. I couldn't go into fashion design from fine arts, but ultimately I got to the textile lab and saw a loom, and that has been it since. So a lot of looms and yarn and moving later, I'm still in love.
That's great. I've heard you talk at length about how you view craft versus art. And would you talk some about how you view that whole argument? And has your view about craft versus art changed as your career has progressed?
Yes. So this is one of my favorite questions because it's so polarizing. Like, this is almost as political as our community can get sometimes, especially when you start speaking to artists that are outside of what fiber art is. They seem to be very opinionated when fiber comes into it. But I think, like, for me, craft versus art and design is kind of a question of like intention. So if someone with a craft, like if you're knitting something for someone or you're weaving something for someone, and it's this very personal downtime hobby, there's like a lot of love that goes into those stitches, and that sort of like embodies that craft side for me, whether it's a table runner or a baby blanket. Like, it seems to go that way more. Whereas I think art and design would more so be answering a question or filling a function or form. So I think your intention of why you're doing it while you're doing it sets the tone for craft or versus art. And then there's things that throw forks in that though, because if you look at like the Loewe Craft Prize, it's an incredible competition that looks at craft throughout like techniques from basket weaving and Japanese, like insane works of art. If you're unfamiliar, it's LOEWE Craft Prize. And they use the word craft in the forefront. And Loewe is an incredible fashion house that's owned by LVMH. So it's, I guess it's everybody's perception of it is different.
Oh, it is. And you're right, it's very polarizing. Usually when I ask that question, I get a lot of blowback.
Yeah,
Why
totally.
do you have to choose? Or so thank you. I appreciate your viewpoint on it.
No, of course.
Your work has, I think, an architectural feel to it. It's like these works that you did for Crosby Street. And if you would talk some about what Crosby Street is, although technically it's a flat weave, but it's like a lot of texture, and it's almost like every weft builds on itself. Can you talk some about that structure and about Crosby Street?
Yeah. So Crosby Street has been an incredible company to partner with, and I mean, they're just great people. They've been in the industry. It's A&M and Soho, but when we started working together, my first question is and was and always will be, how many harnesses can I use? Because this collection is hand woven, and it's speccable to the interior design trade, like custom color, custom sizing. And so I was just running through like the design of like what can you do with the few harnesses, and just building on, I don't know, different. I guess all of my work is focused on like depth, because yeah, flat weaves usually mean flat, right?
Well, this next work is an amazing piece. It is called the Bullet Rug, and you and Raul Martinez created, and this work created quite a stir. Would you talk about how it came about and how you think it's changed your work since you've completed this? Because there's a whole backstory to it, right?
Yeah. So this was one of the coolest things I've figured out how to weave. Raul Martinez is an artist from Spain. And while doing a residency at the Museum of Art and Design, after weaving the first bullet rug in Guatemala, he came to New York, was doing the residency, and he needed someone to figure out how to weave these. In Guatemala, it had been woven at with a man named Mitchell Denberg, who has a place in Antigua, but he needed a team in New York to figure out how to do it. And so we got in touch. I went and visited. Each bullet rug is a ballistic map. So the bullets are collected within 100 miles of where the rug is woven. So each piece sort of tells the story of where those bullets came from and where they're being manufactured. So in the US, most of the bullets are manufactured by the predominant US companies. But when you find a bullet that has an Israeli company stamp on it, or Russia, it makes you start to question how they got here and why. And even more so when you weave one outside of the country, all of the bullets that are sourced locally in that area are usually from one of those three countries, like Russia, the US, or Israel. So it really started like looking like a ballistic map of the area. And we'd be combing through like thousands of bullets and be like, oh my God, we found one from Russia or something. But they weigh about 400 to 500 pounds when they're done. And the bullets were so thick that like the first rug in Guatemala was woven on a flat loom, sort of like a big tapestry. So you never had to wind on to the front beam. And with this, there's obviously cloth storage in the front of this loom on the bottom left. And when it came time to wrap the bullets and like coil them on, he was asking like, what should we do? And I just said, let's cut it, because it weighed probably about 50 pounds by then. And I was like, we weren't sure if we could do it, but all you need is tension on the warp yarn. So I figured the 50 pounds would do the thing. So we cut it and it worked. And yeah, we've made more of them in mass mocha, and I've been flown to Florida to help sew bullets back into a rug that a collector purchased after, I guess, his wife had been walking on it in heels, or their wife rather. But it was a really cool project. I learned a lot through that.
Did it change how you viewed things after you did that?
Yeah, I think I have a lot of rules. I know we'll touch on like schooling in a bit, but there is a right way and a wrong way to do things. And cutting your fabric before it even starts winding onto the front beam is just a no. So it started making me question like why, if a loom, I mean, I guess that a loom is really just a tool to make whatever you want. It doesn't necessarily have to be supple or fabric or anything. So I guess to take more risks with it. And now I make little bitty warps that are an inch wide.
Well, you did a show with Molly Haynes. How did the two of you decide to do a show together? And what was that like for you?
So Molly and I met on Instagram, and she was a designer at Pollock in Soho at the time, and I was designing for Sunbury, which used to be in Soho, and we'd moved up to Chelsea. So I think she messaged me on Instagram, and we got together, and it was just like we had already known each other, kind of. Like it's just very easy to talk to, easy conversation. She's a RISD grad, and then moved to New York and was working at Pollock. So we were both in industry and in craft, and like just keep talking about what that even means. And yeah, we just have a really natural vibe. So yeah, blind met, got lunch. It's like my first date with a lady, and then we'd just gotten together and we're like, hey, do you want to do something for New York Textile Month? Like, let's do it.
I should say that your works are on the back wall in this image, and her works are on the side, right?
Yeah.
And then the second image over here with the cigarettes is yours too, right?
Yeah. And
can you talk about that piece?
Yeah. So this actually is a good segue from Raul and the bullet rugs, because while the piece itself was beautiful, once you hear that the bullets were collected within 100 miles and you start getting into like the narrative, I think that also can be the difference between craft and art. One of them is meant to be pondered and questioned, where the other one might not necessarily, because it doesn't have to. So intention behind, again, what your piece is. So this cigarette piece is called 571, because that is how much a pack of cigarettes cost me in Mebane, North Carolina, where I moved to work as a designer for Umbrella. And the same pack costs $17 in New York City. So I was like, holy cow, like, let's start. I wanted to start, and I have been continuing this series. I have another one I have to put out there still, but buying the same pack of cigarettes in different places and then titling them the name of the cost. And I'd love to get into more of that. Like, why is the tax on cigarettes higher in New York City, where like everything is more expensive? It's 3 times the price. So more to come on that. But yeah, using more data-driven information points. This is the math thing. I'm gonna stop.
Well, you're known for your beautiful passementries. These are some examples. And we have one work here also. And why do you have a passion for this particular art form? And if for those of us who don't know what Passementrie is, would you talk a little bit about it, what it is and the history of it, and talk about this in terms of what drew you to that?
Absolutely. So where do I begin? I'm sorry. Passementrie is Pasmontofi is the French word for traditional trim weaving. If you've ever seen a Passementrie loom, Passementrie, they have the coolest little shuttles. There's multiple ones weaving at the same time. I mean, like, this is Renaissance weaving, curtain tiebacks, like silk upholstered gowns, that whole genre of high decorative art. That sort of all encompasses Passementrie, and it's just a technique I'm fascinated with. I was that kid at camp on the beach while everyone swam making friendship bracelets. So this is my final form evolution of that. And it just makes sense. Like, you have to balance your densities because you do actually have 4 different warps going on at the same time. And you know, you start to learn, and I think this is where Jacquard designing comes from, or influences my work here, and the work with Crosby Street, because for some constructions, you ask how many cards per line, and that's how many dots on the Jacquard punch card or your peg plan that you would have for one face row of fabric. So if you have 3 cards per line, you get 3 different weft options for one face pick. Anyway, I know that in this piece, 4 thins equals 1 thick So I have to weave, I'm focusing on that warp before I shift. And this one has 3 different warps that all weave on the same one at the same time. But I've done crazy pieces that don't even go together, weaving them side by side. Like one has copper and one has raffia, and they're not even meant to go together, but I'm a glutton for punishment and balance my ADD for the benefit of myself. So
I can see that. Yep. Now, this goes back to what you'd mentioned earlier. Some artists that, and we've talked to several on the show about this, is that some artists that work with designers or that they have to do commission work really struggle to stay within the parameters they are given. And for you, it seems like you kind of relish those guidelines and figuring out how to work within those guidelines. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of what I was struggling to get out with the Crosby thing. You can't really know what you can do until you learn what the parameters are. And then figuring out just how far you can play or push within that, I think, is the fun part. So with Crosby Street, I could have done like plated twills and more flatter flat weaves. But for me, it was fun to make it look like off the surface and dimensional, like really push the X number of harnesses that I was allowed to use, which but yeah, and recently I've been speaking more with the A&D community and like specking room dividers and stuff like that, which is something I've always wanted to do. And I kind of always want to come to the table with someone that is asking for a piece, or whether it be for their home or an architect, and sort of just be the filter that their idea goes through, because I am nothing but like techniques and the yearn to do it, but without their like provoking or questioning, I wouldn't get to that same answer. Does that make sense? I just have myself.
Well, that kind of leads me into another question. I'm kind of jumping around here.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I heard you say this, and I love this saying. I heard you say, I am creating so you can create. I think I'm going to put it on a plaque. I love that statement. I am creating so you can create. And you were talking, I'm assuming, about yardage, that you make the yardage and you pass it on to someone else. Could you say more about that?
So I think I gleaned this from when I was at FIT. I don't know if you've spent much time with fashion people. They all have their stereotypes and whatever, so do we. But watching someone that sews walk into a fabric store is like watching a weaver walk into a yarn store. So to know that you're part of that on someone else's end, like I've shown people a piece of fabric, whether I wove it or it's something from the Jacquard mill, which we'll have to talk about in a minute, and seen their face light up. And that is like, oh my God, cool. Because without that end client, unless I'm consuming all of my own artwork, I'm just a weaver in a room moving a shuttle at like, I can only breathe so much life into the yarn until someone else has to take it and finish.
I love that. I love that thought of it's just a continuation, and that and it doesn't have to be one or the other.
When you see, like when you go into a yarn store, I get so excited. And so it was nice to be like, connect those dots and be like, oh, cool. Like,
yeah. Well, you have lived and worked in all kinds of places, from North Carolina to Paris to New York. And many of these areas are viewed as rich in fiber history. They even have a current production, like in North Carolina, they have mills now, and in New York. Or they have the rich history like the South had for years of being a producer of fiber, or the Northeast that started the original fiber production. And when you move from place to place, do you feel a shift in how fiber is viewed in these different places? Is it different in New York versus the South versus Paris?
Definitely. And I'm trying to think of, definitely. So, and we did touch on this briefly. There's so much behind it that I'm trying to string it together in my head first. But growing up in New Jersey, I didn't traditionally have the textile history. There is a lot of it more in like Patterson and Silk City and everything. But I was out in the middle of the woods, but we didn't have that rich textile history in our culture. And like living in Mebane, North Carolina, which I think has like 12,000 people, and now working for Crypton's mill, Abercrombie, in Cliffside, North Carolina, where I believe the population was 187 people as of the last census in 2010. There's generational textile around, like, presence. So I know the woman that works in the testing lab, her daughter works in sampling, and her coworker's father works in warping. So like it's just ingrained in who they are and what they were, who they are and who they will be, and just the life down there. Cotton as a decorative motif is still gonna rub my generation the wrong way. But then thinking about the North, like more in, like when I was doing the bullet rugs with Raul in Mass Mocha, like I felt like I was seeing like echoes of a textile history, which speaks to what you were saying about it starting there really in the US when we were still like 13, etc. And yeah, so within the US, there's definitely, the fabrics part of New York for me is like the fast-paced like design and customers and like interior design. And then in the South, where the mills are, actually, ironically, it seems a little bit more part of their identity, rather than a tool of a trade. And then I don't want to touch too much on this because I know it's coming in one of the questions. The textile history in France and just feeling the
go with
presence
it.
there was, yeah, totally different. I was very fortunate to get a scholarship from pardon me, Carla Bruni, through her foundation. She swapped five students from New York in the arts and 5 from France. So one was painting, photography, dance, music, painting, and then fashion and textiles. So I got the fashion and textiles, and next thing I knew, I was on a plane to a country I didn't speak the language for, and found my apartment on Craigslist. It was not your like study abroad classique that you would think about, but yeah, it's very different. I'm gonna can you remind me of the question, pardon?
Well, the next part of the question was comparing, while you were in Paris, the European viewpoint of textiles and weaving versus the American viewpoint of textiles and weaving. How are they different? And which one do you think you associate more with? What's fits you more?
So this like fascinates me because like in the late 1700s, 1800s, like looking at both of them, Europe was so established in their techniques. I mean, there were like silk velvet looms, and the textile capacity and appetite was so high and had been established for so long that when they were already at the point in a design career of opulence and luxury, it was decorative. It wasn't utilitarian. So in that same time period, coverlets were incredibly popular in the US, and that says so much about where we were in establishing or the growth of the country, and then also what we were using them for. While decorative, it was more utilitarian because we needed to like stay warm. So I think the development of our nations at different times make us look at technique differently. I was doing like 120 ends per inch double warp silk pleats in France, and that was the first time I'd seen it, and I wouldn't even have wanted to spend the time to do 120 ends per inch. Like, that is just insanity, but I did it, and it's because the level of expectation, I think, was just higher. Maybe it was that program, but I don't know.
What do you think? Because the United States went from the you got to make whatever you need to survive kind of weaving, and then the Industrial Revolution happened. It was almost like we never got that in between of making nice things just to make them nice,
I was working for MakerBot years ago. They're a 3D printing company, and it was like right when 3D printing like boomed, and I learned that technology usually goes in of 3 sectors. It touches healthcare and military first, and then it was healthcare, survival needs, and then like luxury was like way down the list. So like you said, I don't think traditional Americana weaving, and we all know what it looks like, never got that chance to peacock the way that like a silk velvet loom may. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. I never thought of it that way, but you're right.
I also can't pretend to. I have an art history minor. I have not read overwhelming amounts on this. This is just my opinion, but yeah.
Well, that's what we're here for, is your opinion. That's what we want to know. Your work, when you talk about the color in your work, it seems to stay within the neutrals or black and white. And I was wondering, is that a choice that those are the colors that work best for you, or is it because you do a lot of commercial work, or some other reason?
Yeah, this is also a polarizing one. I've been told, or people have said, that not using color is a cop-out. And it's a cop-out because using color correctly is very difficult. And I agree. Using color in a meaningful way can be really tricky. I prefer to think of it as like I'm stripping it away so that the texture and the structure are the highlight. Like for me, you can add texture in different ways. I prefer in my own work not to do it through color. But I've been putting it on myself to lean more into it. I have my like little pops of things that I'm working in now. Like I've been very into cobalt blue and this like highlighter cherry that is absolutely everywhere. But yeah, I'm trying to employ color more in my work, but it's usually always been about texture and natural fibers too. So sorry.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because we've had other artists on the show who talked about what you just said, which is you can also hide your mistakes in color. And, sometimes the mistakes are much more visible and easy to see when it's something as simple and neutral. So that's interesting that you can see it from both.
And it also reminds me, I did a residency at a gallery in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn Workshop Gallery, and the director of the residency had said to me, she's become a mentor of mine. She said a good design can stand the test of time. When we walk into the Metropolitan Museum of Art, for example, there's a formula and a rhythm to the way vases are, for example, that just work. And good design can stand next to those objects and last the test of time. And I found that to be important. So if I do something with color, I want it to go the ages. And for me, that usually means a more natural look.
Well, what's next for you? What's next on your bucket list, your plans?
I don't know. I've been working a lot. I'm sorry.
That's
I'm
good.
currently a senior designer for Crypton's new mill, as I mentioned, and I'm back down at the mill. Like I'll spend 2 weeks in New York and then a week down there, and that I'm like running around the looms, and we've been we're a small design team that's really reshaping a mill, and we work together a lot. So that's been taking a lot of my travel time and everything like that. But for my personal work, I want to keep playing with scale. I want to do more installation works where like activate a space. So get into that like Sheila Hicks behemoth of a like, holy moly, how do they do that? And just, yeah, playing with Passementrie and seeing where it can go. I do have some exciting collaborations coming out, but I can't really talk about them yet. And yeah, I don't know.
So how will we know about these collaborations when they do come out?
My friends make fun of me. I love photographing. I can weave a sample that is like 5 inches by 5 inches, and I'm gonna find that like angle and like share it and post it. So I will definitely be sharing pictures of new textile goodies as they come out.
Okay, good. I was curious, while you were talking about how you flying back and forth, do you think that the world's acceptance of doing things remotely changed your ability to do your job? Or do you think pre-COVID, they would have said, sure, you can fly back and forth, no big deal? Has it changed it?
No, I was always going to be living and working remotely.
Okay.
I am very thankful that, I mean, I moved back from North Carolina to New York City a week before the pandemic happened and started a new job. So I'm very thankful that the timing worked out on that. I got to spend the pandemic with my family, which is important. But yeah, I mean, I designed the Jacquards using a program called EAT, and then I dropped the JC5 right onto the Loom server from my studio or from our office in Manhattan. And I think, I mean, we have Zoom meetings constantly. If you're not familiar with Trello, it is an incredible visual organizational tool. But yeah, but it is interesting to be working on these old like historic looms and then know that I'm like Bluetoothing a file to it from my laptop. Like, it's very odd.
Now, did you start doing Jacquard weaving at FIT?
No, so I did 2 years of fine arts at FIT, 1 semester of weaving, I mean textiles, went to France, and then came back and did 2 more textiles. So my 2 more semesters of textiles before graduating. So I had only been studying weaving for about 4 months before I went to Paris. The first jacquard I wove was a double-sided jacquard that I hand wove on, I think it was a half count setup. So what, like 88 ends per inch. And it was on this like old behemoth of a loom, and I designed the file in Point Cray. All the weaving terms I learned were in French, so I had no idea. And then I came back to the US and sounded a little arrogant because I was like, "Oh, you mean petite bobine?" Like, but yeah, first jacquard was in France, and then a professor at FIT, Nomi, had connected us to weave a second one at MTL, and then I worked at Sunbury in Soho, and then Sombrella, and now I'm with Crypton and weaving at home. I joke I'm very one note. Like, people come over to my house and they see like my artwork and my looms. They're like, "What do you do for work?" I'm like, "I also do this." So that's it. This is it for me. It's the yarn.
Well, it sounds like then your trip to Paris kind of added some definite direction to your career. Or would you have learned Jacquard somewhere else?
I don't know. I honestly, I never wanted to do Jacquard fabrics because you're almost getting back into half drop repeat. I mean, you're almost getting back into print, because in order to design a Jacquard, you have to make the print first. So it's ironic because I'm such a Dobby person. I have AVL 16 harness CompuDobby 4 with double beam. A woman, Patrice George, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with, also a mentor of mine. She's a structure junkie, admittedly. Like, she's the one that taught me that a straight draw of 24 or a straight draw of 20 can also be a point draw of 11, or 2 blocks of straight 10, or 4 blocks of 5, or 5 blocks of 4. Like, you start breaking down, and that's the parameters thing again, of like what your limitations of the machine are, and then how to get something to come off the loom that doesn't look like there were any limitations.
I love that. Well, we have some questions from the audience. How about we take some of those?
Cool.
All right. Lori Zollinger said, what kind of warp and what kind of weft yarn do you use? And I'm assuming she's referring back to the Passementrie.
Yeah. So working for mills, I've been very fortunate to get ends or just yarn that maybe we weren't using anymore, or that was an R&D yarn. So I've been obsessed with an 8/2 recycled cotton. It's from a company called Recover, and Sunbury had done some R&D trials of space dyeing it, which was very hard to control because space dyes can line up and flare or flame. And so I have just cones of it and I'm obsessed. So I use an H2 recycled cotton yarn. And then in the fill, there is a Passementrie factory, company, pardon me, in New Jersey, right along over the water from Manhattan. And they do a lot of trim for the furniture industry in High Point, North Carolina. They also do a ton of automotive. So I went there and they were like the two aunts I never knew I had. And they gave me this rolled brown paper. So it's like a twisted cardboard, but it lets the skinny warps be rigid enough that they can hold their own weight, but they also have give. So
it's made out of paper.
Yeah, but it's rolled, so it's very, very dense. It's what they use to insert in the center of what they would then take that and cover it in like a 1/2-inch tape, so it would be like trim or piping or something. So yeah, and then a lot of there's a company in Australia. If anything that you see with felted wool, Little Dandelion from Jackie Fink. Was it? Oop, I don't want to misquote. Sorry. It's all hand felted, thick wools, and then some Sombrella cord that has really great color because you cannot get natural dyes to do that. And yeah, just a lot of stuff.
Do you have a lot of places that you can go hit them up for ends and stuff they don't want?
No. Like I said before, I'm very one note. So like once we meet, you're like, ah, yes, the yarn. So yarn happens to find me now. Like
really?
Also, yeah, I kind of put that on blast. So the law of attraction, I guess, is what I'm working with. But I cannot take any more yarn. Like it is absolutely everywhere. Like, yeah.
Now somebody will ask probably, hey, I got some stuff. Do you want it? We'll say no. All right.
For that reason, I have a hard time doing yardage because I have a lot of like one-off random cones, and I'm like, who are you? Where are you from? Like, what is this old yarn? But anyway, I digress.
No, I don't have that much yarn, but I still have those little orphans. It's like you said, where did you come from? What was I thinking at the time when I picked you up?
100%.
Charles Kinghorn wants to know, on your flat weave, how many harnesses did you use and why? I guess your work at I'm blanking them. I'm sorry. Crosby, yeah, Crosby Street. What are you weaving on for them?
I don't think I can actually talk about that, but I will say that I did a supplemental warps for one of them. And it was the deflected pick, and I'm just going to share this with my fellow weaving nerds because I know that's who's here. I did just plain weave on the ground and then had 2 supplemental warps, one on a 3rd harness and one on a 4th harness. So the ground fabric is actually a plain weave, and then on top of that is just a tacked felted deflection. So that was not that required a special threading, but otherwise I can share. It's not more than 6. I think that was our max. So it depends on where there would end up being hand woven in the end, because I will admittedly say, like, I love developing and coming up with samples and designing dobby fabric. I do not love hand weaving yardage. Maybe that'll change. I don't know.
Well, your loom at home, how many shafts do you have there?
That's 16. 16? The 8th of which I cannot get to listen for the life of me. I've had to like test that solenoid. I'm like, is it too humid in here? Is my spring on the bottom too tight? No, it's too loose. Okay, now it's way too tight. Like I keep trying to figure it out, but yeah, that's 16 harnesses.
You can't get them to listen to you. I like that.
It's just rude. Like we're sitting there ready to go.
I have to remember that. My loom is not listening to me.
The longest relationship I've been in, so.
All right, let's be kind. You don't want to hurt the loom's feeling because then you're only going to have 2 shafts.
Yeah, I know, right?
Carol Davinsky said, besides working with fellow artists, does your guest collaboration with couture fashion designers and or interior designers? Do you do
Yes.
fashion?
Yeah, I mean, I've done some accessories. I was manically hand weaving silk tape for into scarves for Helmet Lang a few years ago. And yeah, that's as far as I've done some accessories, and I think people have made outerwear with some of my fabric, but I'm mainly an interiors person. I love it. I think it's really important and impactful to be in someone's home. Like that's what they're gonna see your work when they get there, and that I enjoy that. A lot of my friends are moving from the fashion industry to the home industry, and I'm always like, I knew it. Welcome. The lead times are longer, we're more chill, the design is just as good, and yeah.
You were ahead of your time.
What? Oh no,
you were
I
ahead
mean,
of your time.
also, I mean, it would be much easier to go into fashion fabrics if they sold for a fraction of what interior fabrics sell for. Also, I think the fashion commodities and fast fashion industry has really messed up some of the appreciation behind the cloth that you're wearing. So yeah.
Yeah, we're getting comments over here about home textiles is where it's at.
It is.
You have a whole team rooting over here. Yes to that.
Someone wants to spend $100 on a dress and $10,000 on a sofa. So I want to weave the sofa fabric, which is like 25 yards. But again, not by hand. I'm just kidding.
You also have someone said, I bet Patrice was a great mentor.
Seriously. And the anecdote I'll share with that really quick is that I was working at a weaving studio called Chappas Textiles, which was handwoven fabric for interior design trade. Tara is great, also an incredible mentor, and working in Patrice's lab at FIT. And I met her through Bonnie Inoya. I'd never say her name right. She wrote a book on double cloth network drafting, I believe, and I got in touch with her and was like, hey, I'm in college, like, can I borrow, do you know anyone that has your book? And she directed me to Patrice. Anyway, Patrice had, while my boss, she let me know of an opening for a designer position at Sunbury. And when your current employer tells you about another job, things are either going really terribly or really well. So Patrice connected me with Mark Rigalunas, another great mentor, and I started designing at Sunbury, and that really changed my life. So yeah, Patrice is great. I'm like a fangirl over here, sorry.
Oh, that's good. Now, she was at FIT?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. I love this question. Diane wants to know, she's talking about the bullet rug, were the bullets live?
No, those are shell casings, each one of which had to be drilled and then polished after drilling, because the number of times that the sharp edge would break the jute monofilament yarn that brings them together, because those are essentially like fancy beads. So if you've ever woven with pearls or beads and inlaid them between warp yarns, then you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, they were, but I mean, I think each rug is around 12,000 bullets. So that's 12,000 holes and then 12,000 polishes. It's a lot.
And you did that?
There were so many people. We
really?
Like, yeah. I was not a hole driller. No.
You can't put that on your resume now, you know.
No, but I mean, I had, because the weaving is so intense with those, like we don't, like I was saying before, you don't wind it onto the front beam, so that 300 pounds ends up laying on your legs as you're sitting there weaving, because it can't, you have to be there to treadle. So weaving them was very painful. I would have gladly traded to drilling, but it was fun. It was fun. I would do it again.
Ouch. Somebody was asking, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but are there very many Jacquard looms in the US? I don't know.
I can't answer that. I know more and more of them are being changed from punch cards to electronic Jacquard heads, but yeah, I mean, the biggest mills are going to be like Valdez, Umbrella, and then, I mean, there's so many. I would say there's thousands of them, hundreds, definitely, certainly hundreds, probably owned by one. Nope, I don't know.
L. Crippen wants to know, she used to, or he, I'm not sure who this is, used to work in the textile designers for interiors in the US. And this person would like you to talk about how the industry in the US is progressing for weavers slash designers. Do you think there's more work for designers and weavers? Same.
I think that the appreciation for handcraft is coming back in a major way, particularly around fibers. Like I grew up in a home where most of the fabrics were probably from Asia. And so US manufacturing and of textiles, whether it be by hand or on an industrial level, I wasn't really recognizant of it until college. But I mean, that's reflective of what happened in the 80s and everything with the textile industry in the US. But yeah, I think especially in New York, there's interior designers that want to spec hand-woven fabric, and people are having a lot of success in that domain. It is very difficult to weave upholstery fabric for interior designers by hand because depending on the price gamut, because their level of specificity with color matching is so incredibly extreme. And maybe the fabric's $300 a yard and they order 15 yards and the client is spending 20, 30 grand on a frame. Like it gets high very quickly. And as that number rises, so does the stress level. So I think, yeah, I do think that there's a resurgence in textiles in the US. Yes. Sorry.
Well, my ignorance is going to show here. I think it's interesting that the term mill gets used for like the whole gamut of weaving, because when you say mill, you could be talking about taking fleece and making it into yarn, or you could be talking about, I'm assuming what you do, which is you take the yarn and you make it into cloth, right?
Yes.
Are you also involved in deciding what kind of yarn they're going to use and where you get that from? Are you involved in the other side of the mill part?
Since joining Abercrombie Crypton, I've been more privy to those conversations. And yeah, I mean, I've been going to domestic yarn manufacturers and like seeing what's on their R&D board and walking around all of the like roving, going up into the machine, like, and as we're all totally tech heads and geeks, like the humming of Jacquard looms is my favorite sound. I call it like, it's my little orchestra. And then the yarn mills do the same exact thing. Like you get the same intoxicating high from walking around a yarn mill. So yeah, it's been a really fun thing to learn more of over the past year and a half.
Yeah, I did. We've had several, especially during Spinning and Weaving Week, we had several mills do a tour. And you're right, it's just mesmerizing to see, you know, how that happens, you know.
And I will continually and always proudly be the person that is 20 feet behind the group because I'm still on my knees taking a photo from some weird angle. Like my coworkers know to just like go on because I'm gonna like spaz out until I get what I think is the right picture.
Serena Rachels wants to know, and I think this is a philosophical question, not necessarily an answer here. Do you think we'll ever get rid of polyester in clothing?
No, you can do some cool stuff with it, like steam pleating and stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, there's a yarn called Reprieve that's recycled water bottles. So I think polyester is not going anywhere, but the derivative that it comes from might, like, because that's still a 22 polyester yarn, but it's Reprieve, which is made from recycled plastic bottles. So in that sense, I'm like, okay. But yeah, I think this Miss Polyester is here to stay.
If you could have the perfect commission work so that it's paid by somebody else, but you could do whatever you want, what would it be? Not to put you on the spot.
I don't know. I immediately just started thinking of, I did a sculptural wall hanging one time that I used phospholuminescent wire in. And I like mapped it out. I used this app to track my dreams and my REM cycle, like when I would go in and out of REM cycle. So I laid the wire in like that, and then it was sound reactive. So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of work being done in the like tech space of light reaction and sound reaction. I know someone that does bobbin lace with monofilament and then charges it with LED. It's insane. So I do miss that part of my work more, and I'd like to do an experiential like activation or something where you walk into the room. I love the like how do you do that moments. So I want to do that, or have a gallery show where all of a sudden the lights turn off at like 6 p.m. and everything like comes to life like bioluminescence or something. I don't know.
Do you consider teaching at all, or is that just not your thing?
So while working for Patrice, I was her classroom assistant, which I threaded the looms and worked with students. I love it. It's very easy for me to communicate with students. It might have been because I was probably 3 years older than them at the time, but I like working with people. It takes a lot of watching someone jump from seeing a 2D draft to visualizing a three-dimensional structure is a really cool feeling, because like a weaving professor for me looked at me the moment that it happened, David Van Buskirk, and he was like, "You're a weaver." I was like, "What?" He's like, "You got it. Like you're a weaver." And I was like, "Uh-oh, what does that mean? How much are these things?" $18,000. Oh, okay.
I don't want to be a weaver.
Yeah, I don't want to do it.
I want to do charcoal.
Exactly. God, yeah, the looms have moved with me from New York to North Carolina, back to New York. So it's been a lot.
I cannot imagine hauling those.
Yeah.
Well, we had talked to somebody else before who did commission work, and one of the things they talked about was how much time and how their skill to be able to convey to someone what weaving is was so important. Now, I'm assuming working at the mill, you don't have to do that because they do the weaving, they understand it. Or are there times in your life where you have to get people to understand, no, you can't just change that thread. It changes everything when you do that. Did you have to explain to people what weaving is?
Sort of. And I think one of the biggest questions, and this is just from my experience, it hasn't happened in my own practice or anything like that, but when I was weaving at Chappas Textiles in Brooklyn, it's very easy for a designer to request that a stripe that was woven horizontally along the loom is now woven vertically, which means it's a warp stripe or a planted warp. And if you're lucky, it is on the same number of harnesses you did, but you can't just go flipping like a 8's2 linen warp and a 2000 rayon chenille. Like you don't do that. So yes, there are questions that people don't understand. My favorite was explaining the difference between knitting and weaving. And I would do it. I was like, you know, that cartoon we all saw as kids where like someone gets a hole in their sweater and they keep walking away and the sweater unravels. That's knitting because it's a loop. But you know, when you fray your jeans and it frays, that's weaving, and they're all individual interlaced yarns. So anyway,
that's a great explanation. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, please. I mean,
that's a great explanation.
That yeah, I don't know. I miss working with people in that manner because, like, yeah, weaving is a very solitary thing. I'm super thankful to have had it during the pandemic, but yeah, I mean, without things like this, we'd all just be sitting at home at our looms. So like activating with the community and like teaching people and all of that is really important.
Well, I'll tell you, it's important that you do things like this today. And I really appreciate you coming and joining us today and talking about your work and your creativity and how everything works. It's been very interesting and very enjoyable. Thank you, William. I appreciate you being here today.
No, the pleasure was mine. I want to thank you for having me, and I am totally an open book. If anyone has any questions, like please feel free to reach out, or any synergies or something you want to share. But it was an honor to be here. Thank you, Grace Tully. I look forward to meeting you someday, and yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, if you do want to learn more about William's work, and he's got great images. Like he says, he takes pictures and they're all on his website. So check out his website at william-storms.com. And again, we do want to say thank you to Grace. It was so sweet of you to come on and sponsor Textiles and Tea and help HGA make this program continue. So thank you, Grace. And I too hope I get to meet you someday. If you would like to sponsor Textiles and Tea or your guild or your business, please go to our website at weavespindye.org and you'll find information there to become a sponsor for Textiles and Tea. Textiles and Tea is also generously supported by the Fiber Trust. And if you would like to support more programming like this, please donate or join at weavespindye.org. And speaking of programming, we have so much programming coming up. Spinning and Weaving Week is next month, hard to believe, October 4th through the 10th. We have, if you joined us last year, you know. If you didn't, let me tell you, it's a week of fiber overload. It's great. We're going to have artists giving us a tour of their studio space. We have different panels. We have thread talks. We have vendors giving you discounts and specials and showing off their wares. So all of you who've been stuck at home and you want to see what's out there to buy, this is a great time for you. And more importantly, we have the fashion show. So all of you who watched the fashion show and said, oh, I should have done that, here's your chance. We'd love to have you on the fashion show. It wasn't as scary as everybody thought it would be. And please join us. We'd love to see what you've been working on the past year. Next week, I am so excited. We have the rigid heddle loom queen, Deborah Jarko. She's going to be here. So I look forward to seeing her next week. Thank you so much for being here today. It was a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, William. We loved having you here. Hope you all have a great week and happy tea.